This is the second part in my short series about modular for beginners, and if you've looked at those modular rigs in people's studios and wondered why there are so many cables everywhere, this may answer some of those questions. In the first, I showed how to go about designing your system, what type of modules you might need to get it suiting your own needs, and in this one I'll be taking a look at hooking it all up, plugging everything in. You've got my few little modules down here ready to go. We'll start with a single oscillator monosynth, with a single envelope, then an LFO, and then I'll plumb in the Mother 32 as well to show how to incorporate an existing semi-modular or something Eurorack compatible that you might already have in the studio. Plus I'll add some effects and create slightly more complex patches. So let's start off by taking a look at the basic building block modules I'm going to add. I mentioned these in my last video, but just in case you've not seen that, I've picked up a few units that have added some functionality rather than sort of replicate what I can already do in the studio. So we'll start off with this Wavetable VCO from Erica Synths, and this complements my existing hardware I've got in the studio, which have got loads of analog oscillators. This has got 16 digital wavetables, each with 16 waves. That's 256 waves in total, and you can sweep through these using the CV input here. It's also got a sub that's got 3 octave settings, which means you can create all sorts of huge and really dirty to really nice subtle tones with this. Plus it's got a lovely bit crusher on it as well. I'm sending that through the Erica Synths again multi-mode filter, and this gives me simultaneous low pass, band pass and a high pass. It's also got a nice sort of drive circuit in it as well. I'm then using the IntelliGel Quad VCA as an amplifier. This has got 4 inputs, which means I can use the out from the sub and from the main oscillator. Oh, sorry, that's it there. So I can use 2 of these inputs to create a mix, mixing them with the mix knobs here. Unfortunately, IntelliGel don't make a black one, but I may change this for something if it pops up in the right colour. I know that's pathetic, but you know, that's the way it goes. And for the first setup, I'll control both of those with a single envelope. Again, this is an Erica Synths ones. It's the black VC envelope generator, and this has got separate inputs for each of the phases of the AD, S and R, and it's really nice because you can control the input signals for the control voltage input signals for each of the phases using these knobs here, so don't need anything else to be able to tweak that. And also it was on sale, too much of a bargain to miss. And then I have an LFO, again a lovely little Erica Synths LFO. So yeah, I've got a mono synth that's got a sub, it's got a VCF, a multi-mode VCF, and it's got a single envelope for the filter and the amplitude, as well as a simple LFO circuit with a square, triangle and sample and hold. And I almost forgot I've got a mult as well, so that I can split the signal coming out of the envelope so that it can go to both the VCA and the filter. So let's take a look at wiring it all up then, shall we? Firstly, we're going to have to install these modules, and this is really simple, but we have to remember one really important thing, and that's to make sure that you get the power cable the right way around. They're already inserted into each of these. You see that up there? And what we've got to be careful of is that we get the red stripe, that's this red stripe here. Actually, there's not much of a red stripe on that cable. Let's find another one, but you can see it, it's there. It's just hard to see on the camera. But most of the cables that you get have a really obvious red stripe. He says, pulling out another one that hasn't got a really obvious red stripe. Here's one with a really obvious red stripe. So they've all got that in one form or another. As I say, some of them are a little harder to see, but it's always there. And every single one of these has on it the power connector, and it will always indicate where the red stripe should be. On this one, for example, it says power here, so that's where the red line goes. Let's take a look at another. This one says minus 12 volts, and minus 12 volts is the red cable, or the red part of the cable. On this one, there's no way you can get it wrong. The cable can only go in one way. It's got a much more complex cable, I suppose you call that. So this is a sort of more dedicated cable for this unit. And there's only one way this can go in, because there's a little notch there and a little notch there. But you do have to be super careful about this, because when I first plugged in my Mother 32, I connected the cable the wrong way around and I turned it on and it wasn't working. And after spending so much time making sure I'd done everything correctly, I was really annoyed with myself. Luckily, it didn't kill the unit, but even when you're taking care, you can make mistakes. So you really have to be careful doing that. So let's connect them up then, starting with the VCO. And I'm going to screw them all in using these Bifico, I don't know how to say this, Nerlies, and they're really handy little screws. Try not to pour them into your rack, but they're just really handy because you don't need a screwdriver. So if we're doing stuff like this as well, if you're swapping and changing them quite a lot, and you're not set on any particular layout and you're testing things around, this is really, really good way of just being able to change things quickly. They're quite expensive. This pack of 50 was about £30, which is very expensive considering you get free screws with them all. But they're a massive time saver, so well worth investing in them. That's all fixed in with all the power in place and the modules aren't moving anywhere, so I can start patching it up. But I can hear you all thinking, but there's nothing to tell the oscillator what note to play. There's nothing to trigger anything yet. And I will be adding the Moog 32 in a minute, but just for a basic setup, you just need something that can send a CV signal for the pitch and a gate out as well. So I'm going to use this little Roland A01, part of the boutique range, and just because it sort of fits on the desk and it's quite handy, but I've got so many other bits in the studio I could do this with. The Arturia Mini Brute can do it, the Moog Mini Moog, the Voyager. I think the grandmother, can the grandmother? Yeah, of course the grandmother can, but the Sub 37, I think that can do it as well. Yeah, there's the fuse box. But as I say, I'm using this because it's nice and small. So we need a CV pitch and we need a gate. One tells the envelope generator when to play or when to trigger, and one tells the oscillator what note to play. And this says here 1 volt per octave, which is the Eurorack standard. And I'm hoping that this is the Eurorack standard, but I'm pretty sure it is because it's got a little sequencer on it. And the idea behind it is that it can interact with anything CV compatible or Eurorack compatible. So the gate out, we'll stick into the gate in of the envelope generator. And the CV out, so the pitch out, goes to the input of the oscillator. So now when I hit a key here, fingers crossed, this should light. There we go, and we got an LED there indicating sort of the phase of the ADSR. So if I turn the release down, that should go a lot quicker. I have no idea if you can see that on camera. So we want the signal to come from the oscillator into the filter. So we take the out from the oscillator and put it to the input of the filter. And then we want the output of the filter, let's use the low pass for now, to go into the input of the amplifier. And then the output of the amplifier goes to my mixer or my audio interface. So there we go. And now we need to split the signal that's coming out of the envelope generator to go to the filter and to the amplifier. And that's where the mult comes in. So we take the envelope generator out and put it into the input of the mult. So that sends the same signal to the cut-off input for the filter and the amplitude input for CV for the amplifier. So when I hit a note, we should hear something. There we go. I'll just change the tuning of this oscillator. All sounding pretty dirty already. So there we go, pitched in. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cables for a really, really simple tone. Let's just adjust the envelope, see what happens. Change the amount of the cutoff affects the filter. Just changing the octave on this keyboard so we get some nicer tones from it. So sounding good already, isn't it? So just have a quick look at this this oscillator. Let's turn the sustain up. So that's all really nice already. Really, really love this thing. Really nasty, gritty tones that I just can't get from a standard analog oscillator. Great, that is. So let's make it a little bit more complex, shall we? And add the sub as well. So with this, I can just bring the sub out and bring it onto the input of, and put it into the second input of the amplifier. Change the octave. Oh, that's meaty, that, isn't it? And with this, the CV from 1 is affecting the CV of 2, effectively. So don't need to split this signal to get it working on on the oscillator and the sub oscillator, which is one of the reasons I got the quad VCA. Let's add the top. So we're getting some amazing tones out of that already. Just a really, really simple setup. That Wavetable VCO from America Synth, fantastic, especially the addition of the sub. But you'll have noticed that the sub isn't going through the filter yet because we've got the main output from the VCO going into the filter, and the sub is then sort of joining that in the amplifier section. So if we want to put the sub through the filter as well, we're going to have to mix the main oscillator out and the sub together before they get to the filter. So we'll need another mixer to do that. Luckily, I've got the Make Noise Maths, been on a little bit of a spending spree, and this is one of the really most simple functions of this, is that these 4 knobs here are a mixer for the 4 main inputs. So let's plumb this in and use it as just a basic mixer to mix VCO 1's main out and the sub into the filter, and then we get a sort of slightly more complex synth. And I'm fully aware that using maths for such a simple thing is a bit overkill, but I've got it, and it does that function, so I'm going to use it. But what we need to do now is take the outputs, these 2 outputs, and put them into maths. So let's do that. So these 2 inputs here are for these 2 knobs here, and I'll take the output from the sum, and I'll put that as the input to the VCF. So now, hopefully, both will be going through the VCF. Let's try that. Sounds like it, just check. That's the main out, and that's the sub. So sounding quite sort of modular-y already. Let's automatically modulate this wave with the LFO, shall we, as well? Slightly more complex again. So let's take the triangle out, put it into the wave CV in. A bit mad and crazy. So let's turn down the amount the CV adjusts the wave. It's really sounding a lot more complex and a lot nicer, but we've got an awful lot of leads here. How many have got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, maybe 10 leads there already. Hence all the wires when you see a massive modular rig. So we've only got one envelope working there. Maybe let's try putting another envelope on. So put a separate envelope on the VCF than we've got on the amplifier. So making use of one of the envelopes on the maths, we'll just rearrange this slightly. So we'll take the gate from the synth and we'll put that into this input here. So we need one to go into the input of the envelope generator and the other one to go to the input of the maths envelope generator on this left hand side. Then the output of the maths we'll put into the filter, and just double checking the envelope generator out needs to go into the VCA. There we go. So there we've got an oscillator with a sub with two envelopes, an LFO and a mixer and an amplifier. So how many cables have we got now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe about 10. Can't quite count them all. So getting quite complex, but it does sound nice, doesn't it? Doesn't sound like any other synth I've got, which is the general idea of this. So let's get a little bit more complex now and add a load more units in one go. I'm going to add the Mother 32 from Moog. It's got plenty of CV connections. It's designed for use in Eurorack, and by adding this, we're getting an amplifier, an LFO, an envelope, wherever the envelope is on this, a sequencer and a basic keyboard. So we're adding another level of complexity. And of course, if you've already got something Eurorack compatible, you might not need to have a separate amplifier, LFO, envelope, or all the various bits and bobs I've already put in. So let's turn everything off and be super careful this time, Starsky, with the plugging of this in. Plus 12 volts, minus 12 volts. So the red wire goes here. So let's do that very carefully this time, if I can. There we go. So this now is starting to look like my very first modular grid, or one of my very first modular grid setups. So we can remove the Roland now and use the sequencer and the keyboard on the Moog. Let's just put it central. And the nice thing about having this on the bottom, as someone pointed out, is that you can actually reach the keys without having to fiddle in between all the wires. And turn it on and hope I've actually plugged it in the right way around this time. Yeah, there we go. So now I've got two oscillators with a sub. I've got the VCA here, but I've also got a VCA in this as well. I've got the envelope in this, a tactic K. I've got an LFO in this. I've got a sequencer and a keyboard, as I say. I've got another filter as well now, which can be high pass or low pass, plus another little mixer. So by adding what you've already got, you're increasing the complexity of your modulars quite a lot, aren't you? You might see behind me here, I've got a crave as well. And if you've seen my videos on that, you'll know it's pretty much identical to the Mother 32. So this could sit next to the whole thing as well. And then we're getting even more complex. Or maybe stick it at the front. So there's loads of stuff you can play around with, which is sort of the fun of it, isn't it, really? So now we're going to use the trigger from this. So we need the gate out. And we're going to use the pitch from this. So we're going to use the CV out. Where is it on here? Keyboard out, it's called on this. So if I play this, maybe. Let's shift octaves. And maybe let's just simplify that tone a little, shall we? Let's turn that down. And then let's bring this into the mix as well, shall we? So from this we could take out the main signal sort of after the amplifier, before the amplifier and after the filter. We can take out the sawtooth or the pulse. So we can treat them as individual oscillators. So maybe let's try taking the pulse out, shall we? Putting that into here. So now this should be modulating the amplitude of the signal coming from the mother 32. Let's try that, at least the pulse wave at least. And now I just want to sit here all day playing with that. Really nice fun. So you're getting the idea now. We could maybe use the sequencer on the Moog. Let's try that. I don't know what I've got in here at the minute. So I think that's all sounding really nice. One thing it might be missing though, that's a little bit of an effect. So there are obviously tons of cool effects available, and I'm using the Eventide DDL here. I picked this not just because it's got a great sounding delay, but because it's really simple to understand for the purposes of this demo. And it's also got a really rough sounding delay as well, where you can adjust the sample rate using this multiply button here to get a few minutes worth of delay, which is great for sort of ambient randomness, but also means that you can, when you lower the sample rate, you get this really sort of gritty, grainy, lo-fi sound, which is really nice. The other effect I've bought so far is this Monsoon Mutable Clouds Parasite, I think they're called, a Parasite. It's basically a clone of the Mutable Clouds, but it's got these sort of extra sliders here, so it's more convenient to use. I'm not entirely convinced it's going to work for what I'm going to use yet, so it may well get sold. It's a great granular sampler, but I'm not sure it sort of fits in with my stuff. So we'll see how that works. Also, it's really complicated, so not great for a demo, just showing how to actually patch basic tones. So again, let's plumb this in. Always encouraging to see them come on when you first turn it on. I don't know why, but I always think I'm going to have done something wrong. Okay, so let's put the output of that into the mixer, and then let's put the output of, where was I, of the amplifier to the input of there, and then just press play, see how we get on. So hopefully that's given some insight into why there are so many cables in every setup you've ever seen. What was it, about 10 for the really simple one, and I don't know what I've got left now. But one top tip is to buy more than you think is feasible. I've just bought a pack of 10 little ones and used them all here without even thinking about it. So if you found that useful, please click on subscribe or take a look at my Patreon page, where I've got over 6 hours of tutorials showing how to program synths module by module, which is a great resource if you're into your programming and you want to design your own tones. Well, I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere, and I'll see you next time.